Less than 24 hours after President Obama first voiced skepticism about sending more troops to Afghanistan, a secret report by the top commander in Afghanistan was leaked, saying that without more troops in the area next year, the U.S. will lose. Coincidence, no doubt. Our fourth story tonight, the Afghanistan war spreads to a new front, the Pentagon. President Obama appeared on all the major Sunday morning news programs yesterday saying he will not commit to sending more troops to Afghanistan without first hearing a strategy that requires it and that he believes will work.
The question that I'm asking right now is to our military, to General McChrystal, to General Petraeus, to all our national security apparatus, is whether it's troops who are already there or any troop requests in the future, how does this advance America's national security interests? How does it make sure that al-Qaeda and its extremist allies cannot attack the United States homeland, our allies, our troops who are based in Europe? That's the question that I'm constantly asking, because that's the primary threat that we went there to deal with.
By this morning, somehow, the Washington Post had obtained the classified report submitted by General McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, the one he submitted to the Pentagon last month, which Mr. Obama has seen, in which McChrystal writes, quote, continued under-resourcing will likely cause failure. However, he also writes, without a new strategy, the mission should not be resourced. The Washington Post also quoting one unnamed Pentagon official referring to Mr. Obama's pace in responding, either accept McChrystal's assessment or correct it, or let's have a discussion. There is a frustration, a significant frustration. Afghanistan, however, has been complicated since McChrystal began his assessment, most notably by the re-election of Bush appointee Hamid Karzai, an election not so much marred by allegations of fraud as defined by them. And even the Pentagon is not uniform on whether to send more troops, no less than Defense Secretary Gates having worried about the impact of too many U.S. troops there. Let's turn to Steve Clemens, author of the Washington Note blog and director of the Foreign Policy Program at the New America Foundation. Steve, thanks for your time tonight.
Hey, good to be with you, Keith.
McChrystal's report actually does give the outline of one suggested strategy for which he says more troops are needed, namely focus on protecting Afghans rather than U.S. forces. Is the president asking a question bigger than that strategy, namely what is the objective?
Well, I think that the president is, and what we see McChrystal doing, and I think we all need to think about it, is saying that the objective that we're looking at is no longer just al-Qaeda, and the way that we go after bad guys is no longer just blowing them up. But essentially what's not written in the headlines is that this is really about a civil war, about Afghanis killing Afghanis, and those Afghanis that we don't like potentially setting up a base for our enemies, meaning al-Qaeda, though you'd have to read in the very small print to find al-Qaeda mentioned, because we're really talking about fundamentalist groups that we don't like much. The only problem is that Karzai and the folks that sort of seem to be running things on the side of Afghanistan that we do like don't like us very much. And it's a very divided situation.
Well, to the point you just raised, the al-Qaeda point, the minority leader in the Senate, Mr. McConnell, issued a statement tonight endorsing the McChrystal request for more troops, and in it he said, and the quote is, anything less would confirm al-Qaeda's view that America lacks the strength and the resolve to endure a long war. You just said that you'd have a hard time finding al-Qaeda in that report. Where does, in fact, al-Qaeda rank in the McChrystal list of the three main groups the U.S. is actually fighting in Afghanistan?
Well, if you listen to Hillary Clinton tonight on the NewsHour on Jim Lehrer, she said that al-Qaeda lies just behind all of these Taliban groups. There are three primary Taliban groups outlined in the McChrystal report, and it's probably the Haqqani network, the second network that probably has the closest affiliation not only with al-Qaeda but other jihadist groups. The issue, though, is not just that. The issue is that al-Qaeda, most people think, is operating out of Pakistan, operating on the periphery of these other issues, maybe even operating in other parts of the world. And it's become somewhat peripheral. You hear al-Qaeda referenced less and less and less. What you do hear referenced are the issues about how the Taliban and its social mores and networks would run against the kind of democracy that we hope would define a victory eventually in Afghanistan. That's a very, very, very different kind of mission. Something that General McChrystal's report argues you need something on the order of near a doubling, not only of Afghan forces and police, but also American military and European military that are deployed there. So this would be a huge, huge upgrade in America's responsibility for an outcome in Afghanistan after 8 years of not getting very far.
Is the problem with the McChrystal report that it's just about Afghanistan, because, or it's focused seemingly just about Afghanistan, but even he wrote, senior senior leaders of the major Afghan insurgent groups are based in Pakistan. That suddenly you're now talking about Afghan-Pakistan relations. Does that explain the Obama desire to look at it in terms of big picture?
Well, I think, Keith, the reality is that Syria strategists know that this is all basically about Pakistan, that there's a fear that unless you get a modern, stable Pakistan in place, which people feel you can't do unless you stabilize Afghanistan, and Afghanistan will constantly feed in insurgent groups and groups. And we saw recently, just 6 months ago, how vulnerable and fragile Pakistan was, with major towns and cities falling very near the capital of Pakistan. So fragile democracies and very, very committed insurgent and Islamic fundamentalist groups make us nervous when nuclear weapons are involved.
Lastly, briefly, Steve, the leak itself, we don't know who actually leaked it. There are probably some good guesses, but who benefits from this?
Well, listen, the military benefits, and it's not just the timing, it's the question that for a long period of time, Admiral Mullen, who's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other people have been talking about the need for a real uptick, a very big surge in American forces and resources committed to Afghanistan. Oddly, they're talking about military resources, not the sort of private civilian and non-military resources. That's not very much a part of this report, in my view. And so the military benefits, and to some degree, I think that, when Joe Biden said that Barack Obama was going to be tested by his rivals and occasionally his enemies in the beginning of his campaign, it seems to be the military is testing him right now.
Steve Clemens, the author of the foreign policy blog, The Washington Note. Many thanks for your time and for your insights.
Thanks, Keith.